last speaker this evening is Rhys Cohen from the Lambert Initiative.
Hey everybody, glad you're still awake. I just want to say before I get started, this has been, it's really incredibly encouraging to be in front of so many people thinking about and paying attention to medical cannabis, especially when so many of you are health professionals. This is the second time that Paul and Charlene have taken me around Australia delivering talks to health professionals, and this has been by far, I think tonight has been by far the most encouraging experience that I've had, and perhaps the other two have had as well. So thank you for being here. So my name is Rhys Cohen. I'm the Senior Project Officer at the Lambert Initiative for Cannabinoid Therapeutics. It's a multidisciplinary research group within the University of Sydney. So I'm from I'm from Sydney. If you Google me, you'll find me affiliated with these two organisations. I'm no longer affiliated with those organisations, and I am employed by the university. This is how the Lambert Initiative got started. That's Caitlin Lambert on the left, and Caitlin's about 6 years old now, and she has Dravet syndrome. That's her dad, Michael, and Michael was giving black market medical cannabis to Caitlin and found it to be really effective, and it was working really well to help manage her seizures and some of the other side effects. Unfortunately, Michael got done and went before the courts, which is how the Lambert Initiative essentially got started. Luckily enough, Michael's parents are Barry and Joy, and Barry is a very successful business person, and in 2015, Barry and Joy donated $35 million to the University of Sydney to fund the Lambert Initiative for a 10-year research program. So that's sort of where we're coming from. If you're interested in keeping up with what we're doing, that's our website, and if you'd like to subscribe, you go to that web address and plug your email address in, and you'll get sort of regular updates on what's going on around medical cannabis in Australia and around the world. So feel free to join that little mailing group. All right, shameless self-promotion over. On with the talk. Sorry, oh. All right, I'll put my email address up at the end, so don't worry about catching any of this stuff if you don't need to. Great. So I want to talk about medical cannabis use in Australia at the moment. I should explain, sorry, I forgot. So I'm not a health professional and I'm not a scientist. My training is in political economy, and I came at medical cannabis from the sort of politics and economics side of things. And at the Lambert Initiative, I basically do as much of the non-science work as I can to free up the scientists to do their work. So that includes internal project management, community outreach, policy development, that kind of thing. So just a disclaimer. So I want to talk to you about illicit use at the moment in Australia, how it's being done, the limited licit use that we have, the legal products, and sort of the performance of the legal framework, and then maybe talk a bit about what's going to happen over the next few months, few years, and what we can do to solve or start to address some of the problems that we're having with the system. So this is all research that is unpublished. I'm going to share with you a few unpublished research projects that I was not involved in, not my work, and this data is all provisional. But we were curious to find out what was going on with illicit medical cannabis use in Australia and sort of what people were doing and why and how it was going for them. So we did an online survey last year, and we got about 1,700 participants to complete this survey about their medical cannabis use. So this is people who identify as using cannabis for medical purposes. We asked them what were what was their top 10 indications that they use medical cannabis for, and straight away back pain, number one. Following back pain, and this is interesting to us in particular, were anxiety, depression, and sleep. So psychological conditions. It's chronic pain and neuropathic pain are one of the sort of top 4 conditions in Australia that are considered to be most appropriate for cannabinoid therapies. But psychological conditions are right down at the bottom of that list, and there's much more limited evidence around psychological conditions. But that's what's going on in the community. We asked people how much they spent on their medical cannabis. on a weekly basis. You'll notice that there's a few people that are paying $300, $500 to access their medicine, but there's a really quite substantial proportion of people who are paying very little or nothing at all to access their medical cannabis. So these are people who are probably growing cannabis at home at no cost, or they're being gifted it through a family member or a community member or a compassionate supplier of some kind. And this is really important when we consider how these products compare to the legal products that are available and the sometimes quite insurmountable expense that can incur. Moving on to pediatric epilepsy in particular, which is a special interest of ours. Last year, the initiative ran the Pelican study, which is the Pediatric Epilepsy Lambert Initiative Cannabinoid Analysis study, where we went out into the community and we found families who had children with severe epilepsies, including Dravet syndrome. And we got them to come in to the Lambert Initiative and bring their products that they were using with them. And we did an in-depth interview with them, went through their seizure diaries, and ran their products through our machines to see what we can find. And the idea was to try and leapfrog some of this drug development process and see if there was some community knowledge around what cannabinoids or what therapies are effective for these conditions, and see if we can speed that process along. So now this slide is quite busy, but I'll just talk you through it. So that's Jordan, by the way, who runs our chemistry lab. This is all her work. These are 27 of the samples that we tested that the parents said were effective in treating their children's epilepsies. All of these parents were told that they were giving their children CBD oil. All of these parents were told that they weren't giving their children any THC. So each one of these vertical bars is a different sample. And quite a lot of them contained essentially no cannabinoids. A couple of them contained significant amounts of what they said they contained, CBD. Almost all of them contained some amount of THC. So this is an interesting exercise. It wasn't perhaps as fruitful as we would have liked, but it did tell us, it did give us a really clear indication of the diversity of the products that are around at the moment and how unreliable these products can be in terms of containing what they are meant to contain. So to sum up, illicit medical cannabis use in Australia is pretty widespread. I would say it's conservative that a conservative estimate would be that at least 100,000 Australians use cannabis for exclusively medical purposes every year. Mostly people use it on average to manage their pain and psychological conditions, and no one knows what they're taking. Which is a problem. Well, how does that compare to the illicit use that we have in Australia at the moment? There are certainly some advantages to using illicit products. You know what you're consuming. The ingredients are known, talking to that, the points that were made by Cameron before me. As a result, you can accurately dose, and you know that you're not accidentally consuming or giving someone else contaminants and pesticides and aflatoxins and heavy metals. On the downside, accessing these products can be incredibly time-consuming. It does depend on the doctor. If your doctor's not interested in pursuing medical cannabis, you won't get medical cannabis. And these products are also potentially quite expensive. On the extreme cases, for some of the pediatric epilepsy cases, $1,000 plus a week to purchase the required dosage. Not covered by health insurance, can be quite tricky, to say the least, for many people to manage. I couldn't afford that. I want to talk a bit about patient access and the process in general. I'm not from WA, so bear with me if I make any mistakes. But essentially, when we're talking about accessing cannabis products in Australia, we're talking about accessing unregistered medicines, unless we're talking about Sativex, but we'll leave that to one side for now. Generally speaking, if any of the doctors in the room are pursuing a medical cannabis product or considering a medical cannabis product for their patient, you'll be looking at the Special Access Scheme Category B pathway. You might also be trying to become an authorised prescriber, but we'll leave that for now in the interests of time. So to prescribe a Special Access Scheme Category B unregistered medicine, There's the state process and the federal process. If it's a Schedule 4 product, that is a cannabis medicine where of the total cannabinoid content, 98% of that cannabinoid content is just cannabidiol. So 98% pure cannabidiol, that's a Schedule 4 medicine. And you don't need to pursue this flowchart in WA to prescribe a Schedule 4 unregistered cannabis medicine. For other medicines, you do. It can be quite a time-consuming process. I understand that the committee that assesses these applications meets once a month. And depending on the particular condition or situation, you will need a specialist. If you are a GP, you will also need a condition specialist to sign off on your application. That can be quite tricky. I am told by Paul and Charlene, who are locals, that despite this process, there have been quite a number of approvals come through WA, which is really encouraging. So it's not an insurmountable process. This is the federal process. So for both Schedule 4 and Schedule 8 medicines, you will also need to submit a SASCAP-B form to the TGA. And it's a one-page form, and it's available at that URL. And it's pretty straightforward. The TGA doesn't require you to be a specialist necessarily, but depending on the case, they may come back and request that you get a specialist to sign off on your application as well. What do doctors actually think about medical cannabis in Australia? Well, my boss, Ian McGregor, did a survey of some GPs last year and asked them about their knowledge of and attitudes towards medical cannabis, and found some pretty interesting results. We got 640 people, 640 GPs responded. So first of all, it looks like GPs in particular are getting quite a lot of inquiries about medical cannabis, which is probably unsurprising to most of the people in this room. And they don't know much about medical cannabis, according to them. We asked them about what they knew about the effects of these cannabinoid products, what the regulatory approach was, what the stance of their college was, and pretty much across the board it was very low levels of knowledge, which means that more education needs to be done in this area for sure. GPs generally accept that, or generally want a system where they work in collaboration with specialists to make these prescriptions happen. And they don't want it to be just a specialist-only system, which is pretty close to what you have in WA at the moment. Encouragingly, these GPs were very supportive of prescribing medical cannabis for certain indications. And the top 4 ones there are pretty familiar to us by now. Interestingly, and this relates back to the other content that I had about the current community use of medical cannabis, GPs are much less likely to consider prescribing cannabis medicines for psychological conditions. More research needs to be done in that area before that comfort level comes up. How well is the framework working, the legal framework working? Well, since the last time that I did these talks, we've had about a 100% increase in the number of available imported products and the number of companies holding licenses for cultivation and manufacture of these products in Australia, which is really great. I know we have some industry members in the audience tonight as well, so keep up the good work. That's been translating very, very slowly into patient access in a real sense. We've gone from about 150 in May last year to about 520, or probably just over 520 now at the national level. Not quite where we need to be as far as 100,000 goes, but I'm sure we'll get there eventually. Just a note on price. The price issue does seem insurmountable. On the left-hand side, this is data from Canada. On the left-hand side are the number of registered medical cannabis patients from 2014 to 2017. And on the right-hand side is the average price per gram for cannabis that is accessed via a doctor's recommendation in Canada over the same time period. So the message here is, given enough time, prices do come down. Industry does take time to build up, and we do need to probably work on some interim measures as well. In terms of these products being too expensive, we need to forget about the pharmaceutical benefits scheme. The PBS is there to subsidise registered medicines. None of the medicines that we're talking about, generally speaking, are registered medicines and won't be for 5 years minimum. There are opportunities to subsidise those products at the state and territory level, however. Tasmania is doing this. They have a pretty poor patient access pathway, but the patients that get through have their products subsidised so that they are affordable. They are as affordable as if they were on the PBS. And that's a policy I would like to see taken up by other states and territories, and I'm sure you all would as well. making sure that, that doctors are informed about and feel empowered to consider medical cannabis products for their patients. Some of the work that Paul and Charlene are doing is contributing to that. And there are more and more training opportunities coming online every day, and I'd encourage you to reach out to MCRA and inquire about those. They can point you in that direction. The process for patient access is time-consuming. That is slowly improving. We've had some really encouraging progress in New South Wales in particular, moving to harmonise their, well, partially harmonise their application process with the federal process. And it's becoming politically toxic to block patient access in obvious ways. So the kicking and screaming is working, and people are paying attention. It takes time for that to translate through. Look, that's probably all I have time for now, but thanks so much for coming once again. It's been really great sharing this information with you, and feel free to hit me up on email or anything if you want to get in touch. So thanks.